This week's episode is brought to you with the support of Bureau Veritas.
At Bureau Veritas, each and every one of us is by your side to help you navigate your decarbonisation journey and shape a better maritime world.
This is Green Seas, the podcast by TradeWinds about sustainability and the business of the ocean. I'm Eric Priante Martin, and today we're going to Japan to talk about alternative fuels for shipping. As shipping faces pressure to move toward the global net zero ambition, there's a growing order book of vessels that will be able to run on alternative fuels. But there's a way to go, and the path forward is uncertain. TradeWinds editor-in-chief Julian Bray was in Tokyo, where he spoke in front of a live audience with a panel of shipping industry leaders to try to map out that path. Here he is speaking at the TradeWinds Shipowners Forum Japan. Some of the panelists were speaking through interpreters.
It is a great pleasure to come onto this final panel, again to dig a little deeper into the question around new buildings and future fuels, this more from the perspective of ship owners themselves and traders. It's a pleasure to be joined by Michihiko Nakano, the CEO of E5 Lab, part of Asahi.
You can call me the Mike. Mike.
Thank you, Mike. I've been destroying the Japanese culture all morning. I must apologise for it. But part of Asahi Tanker, which is a collaboration around the tanker business working on new technologies. Next up is Oystein Kalleklev, the CEO of Flex LNG and Avance Gas, of which he successfully managed to sell most of a couple of months ago in a deal that was actually came about, I think, had its roots at a shipping conference, no less. Not one of ours, sadly, but nevertheless, congratulations to you for that, Oystein. Andrew Hoare, the head of Fortescue Marine Systems and Green Shipping as part of Fortescue, the major Australian mining and minerals group. And at the far end, a pleasure to have Hiroyoshi Kubo, Executive Officer for Mitsui OSK lines, and he oversees the marine fuel and carbon solutions projects.
Maybe you can call the shorter Hiro or something.
Okay, Hiro, thank you very much. Gentlemen, can I ask you a first sort of straight question? We're talking a lot about future fuels and what is being ordered and what is not. This year, I believe, around 50% of ships being ordered are still conventional. Those ships will be around for 20 or 25 years, when we'll be heading very quickly towards net zero, probably, in all likelihood, the way the politics and economics is moving. Why isn't that figure nearer to 100% today?
じゃあ日本語で失礼しますけれども、
Yes, looking at the operators and the ship owners, I don't think they have still doubt to decide one. I think there are various doubts, but first is a technical aspect, the safety aspect, the technological aspects and the regulations related to technology, and also supply aspects and safety, supply safety. So how freely we can purchase. And also the economic aspect, the last aspect, and concerning the alternative fuels, mostly they are going to be more expensive. And taking into consideration these points, at this moment, the ships that will come, the alternative fuels that would need to be considered in the future, we still have doubts there to utilize the alternative fuels. Yeah, we're still skeptical about this, and to just draw down to one type of fuel.
Your main fleet, your focus is principally LNG today in Flex LNG, and those ships are burning LNG. But when you look out across the broader shipping world, and you're part of the Frederickson Group, of course, that has many ships of other types, Is it a surprise to you that not more ships are currently being ordered to be dual fuel, which builds in that optionality today? Or do you see that it's simply the business case isn't quite there for a lot of people?
No, I wouldn't say I'm surprised. Actually, 50% alternative fuel is quite big, because I think, for a lot of the tankers and bulkers, it's very expensive investments to put on a dual fuel system. So kind of you solve the propulsion puzzle for some of the segments, being LNG ships, where you can just eat off the cargo for your fuel needs. Similar for LPG, where you have the dual fuel LPG engine now, and also where you also see the LPG ships also becoming more like the VLACs, ammonia carriers. We have sold off 16 of our VLGC this year. We still have 4 MGCs left, where we can also carry ammonia, and where we're also looking at the ammonia upgrade for fuel. Large container ships, most of these are now turning to LNG. So, but then you have these bigger segments, which is the tankers and bulkers, and it's just very expensive to add a dual fuel engine, and that's why also you see order book for the large tankers and the large bulkers are record low, because nobody really wants to put that money on the betting table here, because transportation cost is quite low for the tankers and the bulkers, and if you're adding this equipment, you're adding a lot of costs, where you are not necessarily able to source that bunker fuel everywhere in the world. So I'm not surprised.
Andrew, you're obviously committing in Fortescue to future fuels. How are you squaring that business case scenario?
It's obviously hard. I mean, to go back to the earlier point, you talk about 50%, and I'm not as optimistic as that. I see actually of that 50%, there'll be people there who have neither the fuels nor the intent to actually use that capability on the ship. So I think what does drive the capability and the actual action to use it actually has been regulation. Within that order book, you'll see that the container ships, car carrier ships, they have gone ahead and ordered dual fuel ships because the European rules, ETS, Fuel EU, will require them and has required them to do so. And those are led not only just by regulation, but also by the customer as well. So those industries are perhaps one step away from the customer. I think they feel they have less incentive to do so. But I think another important factor, we often hear about the IMO and MEPC. The IMO does a lot more work than just preparing for the MEPC. We're interested in MEPC because it's about incentives and penalties and money and costs and so forth. But actually, the real work, I'd say, done in the IMO over the last couple of years, and we've done this, has been heavily involved with both in Singapore context, Australia context, and the Japan context, is setting up the framework in the IMO CCC to ensure that as of last month, ammonia and other fuels have now been cleared by the CCC to be put up for approval in the IMO IMSC in December for the use of ammonia as a fuel. So that's the enabling side. I think that's the most important part that we should be looking at. Once you're enabled, that actually gives people the confidence to invest. So how do we fill up that balance, 50%, 75%, whatever it is through that enablement. And I think that's what's been achieved at IMO CCC and will hopefully be mandated in December.
Kubo, could I ask you this question of the rollout of alternative fuel ships. Mitsui OSK has a number of projects looking at ideas and real world ships in a number of cases. But how will you be able to scale up the rollout of the dual fuel projects?
なかなか難しいとは思うんですけど。
I think it's going to be quite difficult because when you think about the shipping companies, because it's not only oneself, you have to have the dockyard and the people who make, and we have to transport goods for clients. It's not only us. We have lots of stakeholders, and therefore one of the aspects or elements is big, but there should be economic merits. Then the clients will agree, the shipbuilders will, then we will be able to build up this kind of a scheme. LNG is economically advantageous, and it won't have that much disadvantages. And that's why I think it's advancing forward. And that's why we have to think about the economic aspects first. So, taking into consideration the ammonia and hydrogen, we have to think about toward the shipbuilders, how we be able to do payback. That sort of strategy is required. And for LNG, yes, it's a practical method to utilize and roll out. Yes, at this moment, I think it's an appropriate way to utilize at this moment.
I ask you about the question around the sophistication and the tiering of future markets, perhaps how they may evolve with future fuel. In recent years, we've seen markets adopt prices for tankers, particularly not only around age, but around scrubbers and around eco engines. Looking at rates for big tankers now is like looking at a spreadsheet rather than a bar chart. Do you see the rollout of future fuels and the additional costs and/or benefits to charterers increasing again the tiering of the market and making the market appropriate for certain players at certain times in a more defined way?
Difficult question. I think it's very clear a lot of the activity today on the commoditized shipping is being driven by charterers such as ourselves, because we set our own climate ambitions, which are very, very well articulated. So therefore, what does that mean? Does that mean there'll be a multiplicity of different ways that we all play in the market? To some extent, yes. So we are going to be moving into a multi-fuel environment where you've perhaps got the smaller independent owners who cannot move, and they're going to be focused on one type of fuel, one type of pricing, and others will move to other type of pricing. But I think the big question is often people are saying, how much is it going to cost to move? Actually, my question will be, how much is it going to cost to stay? So even for that small owner, is he going to remain in a tertiary market of left behind on fuel oil, or he himself, their family, have to move into different types of fuel as well? So I believe that tiers will be established, but there are many, many other links around this. I think you'll find that rather than tiers, it will link to these green corridors. There'll be certain passages which use certain types of fuels, certain dedicated trades which will serve certain types of fuels. So I don't necessarily think there will be tiers of markets. I think there'll be different types of markets along different routes. Australia to Japan will clearly be a low carbon route quickly. I think probably the east-west trades through Singapore will be. Perhaps small regional trades will have a different sort of market, but then that means the market becomes much more structural, much more restricted, because you're maybe not so able to trade into different markets. It's a complex question, but I see that the market is going to be much more fixated in the early days of the transition around different zoning within the markets and how we behave in that market.
Oystein, the lesson of LNG as a fuel in recent years has been one about price. Yeah. When it's been cheap, everyone bundles in. When it becomes more expensive than conventional fuels, well, frankly, people don't want to be burning it. And then when it goes to ridiculous prices, it's simply an economic necessity not to burn it. Are there lessons in that for the future fuels landscape, in that the pricing mechanisms will need to be not only they'll need to be effective both in scale and in variation to enable to deliver economic outputs?
Yeah, of course, it's not surprising that people are not wanting to buy LNG when it's expensive. Shipping is generally a low margin business. So every dollar counts. We saw back in 2022 actually, because our ships are dual fuel. So when LNG prices went all the way up to $100 per million BTU, which equates to about $600 per barrel of oil. So imagine if $600 per barrel of oil hit the whole world economy, it would be a disaster. So we were running our ships at that time, and a lot of the charters were instructing us to utilize as little LNG boil-off as possible and rather supplement with fuel oil. And our kind of CIA rating took a hit that year because of that. Now that LNG prices come back to earth, we see us mostly burning LNG all the time on a natural boil-off speed. But in general, the LNG bunkering market has taken a lot of time to develop. and it was really hit by the fact that LNG prices were so elevated during 22 and 23. EU was complaining a lot. EU did not complain in 2020 when LNG prices went on to $1 per million BTU, which is about $6 per barrel of oil. But once it became excessive, then they started to complain. But also that kind of volatility in the prices and the elevated level also resulted in the LNG bunkering market stopping up for basically 2 or 3 years, and as you wrote in TradeWinds recently, or Lucy wrote, the LNG bunkering market is really coming back now because of all these alternative fuel ships, particularly in the car carrier and the container segment, where there's a lot of fueling demand for ships. But this means that if it takes so much time to build a LNG bunkering system, imagine how much time it's going to take to build a methanol or ammonia fuel system.
Indeed, indeed. Mike Nakano here. Do you believe that LNG has a long-term future as a fuel alongside zero carbon fuels?
LNG はその
Well, for the LNG, the emission reduction effect is kind of limited. So like bridging fuel, I think it is just bridging fuel. But last week, as the operator side, as what is important is supply stability is important as a supplier, and technical establishment is another point, and the price. So for the alternative fuel, the realistic fuel is LNG, I guess. So, by watching the trend, bridging a fuel, but I think the LNG stays longer than expected. Under, I don't know, until 2040 or I don't know, but it exists longer than we expected, I guess.
Could I follow up and ask your views on methanol, which appear to have a moment in the sun a year or so back, but now seems to be going out of favour again in many people's eyes. Why has that happened, and where do you think the long-term trend will be?
Methanol, you mean?
For methanol.
Okay. Methanol.
Right. So as for methanol, there are two advantages. One is easy to handle, easy to operation, relatively easy to operate. In similar, easy to store. So it's easy to storage comparing it to other ammonia or other hydrogen. So it is easy to store. So I think it becomes popular, but there are disadvantages too. So the disadvantage is G density is low, so which means we need a bigger container or vessels, and I think it becomes popular, but so how much we can secure the methanol, blue or green? Blue is kind of meaningless. So how much amount we can secure the fuel? So technically it is fine, I guess.
Kubo, could I ask you your views on LNG versus methanol today as the fuel of choice in dual fuel engines? What is your perspective?
Right, for methanols, LNG, our mainstream is LNG, in the past, but for methanol, Musk or Elon Musk, he said he switched to LNG. So LNG or methanol, or if it is a carbon zero, hydrogen or methanol, it depends on the evaluation, but methanol is another transition fuel, another alternative. So as Nakamura-san mentioned, it's easy to handle it. So how big is the methanol? So considering it, so the volume of the marine is 20 million or so, but still it's limited for volume for transportation. So so we needed to create or manufacture green methanol. So who is gonna invent and who is gonna manufacture it? So it depends, right? So as for bunkering, we needed to secure the infrastructure. So it's very difficult to invest in the infrastructure for methanol. So methanol dual fuel or ammonia dual fuel is preferable. Or I think it's going to ammonia base or hydrogen base, I guess. But it depends on the 2 to 3 years. So everything is gonna be changed. So we need to also consider, and it's the final solution is final goal is net zero. So we flexibly consider the means of doing it.
Andrew, the swing back in terms of new buildings in the last, certainly the last 6 months, 9 months perhaps, towards LNG, perhaps says that the world is accepting that LNG will be around in larger volumes than people had perhaps been hoping. Rather, they hadn't been, the aspirations hadn't been grounded in the likelihood of ammonia and methanol being widely available at scale, apart from on particular routes. Do you think that's a fair assessment, and where does that leave the landscape for companies such as your own?
Well, I think it's clear, as you say, over the last few months, LNG has taken a substantial leap forward, but I think we still don't see this as a long-term solution because of, frankly, the carbon in the fuel and the fact that this isn't bio-LNG. So it's always going to be facing the headwinds as the carbon taxes prevail over time. So ammonia, which hasn't been sanctioned at all until effectively it's cleared at MSC later this year, we still have seen, as our good friends at ABS mentioned, there are many ammonia vessels, ammonia ready, as they say, on the order book. And that was without the surety. So I think now those regulations are cleared, when you get a little bit more understanding through MEPC, I think you'll see again there will be another shift. What's interesting is perhaps the sector where you'd expect ammonia to be taken up quite quickly has migrated to LNG. But I think if you look at the dry bulk sector, it's very, very clear that the propensity is most likely to be moving towards ammonia in that sector as well. And I think, again, this will follow suit in car carriers and perhaps later on in the LNG sector. But I think from my perspective, the most interesting early orders have been on the dry bulk side, on the tanker side even, and also we often talk about, hey, small ships are not suitable for ammonia. If you look across the other side of the world in Norway, there's quite a substantial tender out there today for ammonia to fuel the platform supply vessel sector in Norway as they seek to decarbonise the Norwegian shelf. So I think you're going to see ammonia popping out right across the shipping spectrum, perhaps not in the container sector first.
Oystein, it's all very easy to get lost in space talking about theoreticals of the future where there's so many changing issues. The one thing that is very true, though, is the cliche that the greenest fuel is fuel that isn't burnt, which brings us neatly back to energy-saving technologies. The question for the ship owner, of course, with ships that are already on the water is payback. Over time, the length of time that ships may still be being traded, the attitudes of charterers to those ships. Are there any interesting examples of energy-saving technologies that you've employed that have spoken to the challenges of gaining acceptance and/or the payback?
I think in general, of course, the best way to save is to slow down, and of course, as the containment system on LNG ship, for example, becomes more efficient, you can have a lower natural boil-off speed, or you can use reliquefaction systems in order to reduce your kind of cut-off speed. Of course, in relation to fuel savings, we are talking to all our charters all the time, to find ways to get better CII scores, to find better ways to make savings, because fuel is a substantial cost. In general, what we have been doing is to get more data. So it's a lot of talk about energy-saving devices, but it's also about what we have been doing is to put a lot of sensor on board on our ships to get real-time data, where we also kind of feed this big data into machine learning, and where we get feedback. How can we optimize the way we operate our business, and it's also about optimizing the routes, because what happens a lot of time is you speed up and then you wait, instead of having a more realistic voyage scheduling. So I think in general that's where we see the most kind of dialogue with the charters these days, is to optimize the voyage in order to also preserve the best possible CII rating.
So it's more about the operations rather than the tech, in fact.
Yeah.
Andrew, is that your experience as well, or are you more focused on the tech?
No, I think it is both. I think maybe just to build on tech, I'm often associated with being the ammonia person as well. I think if you look at the whole spectrum of fuels, we must add electricity, the electron, to that spectrum as well. From the previous section with Bar, their technology came out of Formula One. We have a technology group, Fortescue Zero in the UK, and that started from Williams Engineering. We just signed a $2.5 billion order with Liebherr to supply 450 mining trucks with batteries that we will manufacture, we'll produce the systems in the UK. So it is that spectrum. So technology is very, very key, and the mix is very, very broad. It's not just to the fuels, you say, not just to the things you burn. Batteries is great to be used in ports and so forth, and tugs and so forth, for nearshore shipping. So the spectrum is broad. So interesting developments on the way.
Mike Nakano, have you looked at energy? Do you look at energy saving technologies in the context of fuel demand as well? What is your perspective?
そうですね。いや、今行う
Right. So what we done is kind of try and error stage, I guess. And so to solve the challenge, we need to assess the impact in the long term. So something like a breakthrough is available or not, or supply chain breakthrough is needed, or something, if something is missing, it is not clear, I guess. Yes, this is a good question, but it's difficult to answer.
Fair enough, fair enough. Just to wrap up, could I ask you all for your view of what you would like to see change? I know Oystein is a bit of a runner, and one of the key maxims of all sports people is changing what you can influence. Don't worry about those issues that are out of your control, but focus on the things that you can change, that your company can bring some impact to. So, Mike, what are the key elements of the green transition do you hope to bring to the industry in the next few years in your role?
キーファクター。
Right, for key factors, right? So personally, energy consumption it would be determined with 3. So one is price difference is one first point, and the technical breakthrough is second point, and the third, and the legal framework is another element, I guess, for transition. So within 3. So one, if something from one is came out, it is going to be nice, and the breakthrough, technical breakthrough, battery breakthrough is the key element within the 3, I guess.
What can you change? What do you hope to change?
It's rather what we would like to change, and what we would like to change is this spaghetti soup of different regulation. It's just we're already dealing with a pretty complex problem. And then we have the EU system, EU ETS, and then you have the fuel EU maritime, you have the green corridors, you have the IMO, and the IMO rules are changing all the time. So, we are a company, our purpose is to make money. And of course, all regulation has a cost. So it's finding that right balance between regulation and kind of simplicity. So I just have to repeat what the CFO of NYK said. I used to be CFO of Knutsen NYK. Okay? It's a uniform system that applies to all to make a level playing field, which makes it also less costly to comply with. So that you have one single CO2 price all over the world, And we don't have all these technical rules on top of it, because once you are paying to emit, you will have incentives to find smart ways of running your business.
I guess next spring we'll probably have an answer to a major step forward in that, if it's possible. So yeah, indeed. Hiro, what would you like to change or like to see changed?
There are two. One is cost-friendly.
Okay.
Because the cost is encourage us to promote forward. So, but it's difficult. So right now we are struggling because individually working, because we're working for the investment ammonia, and the MOL also working for the ammonia, but it's not efficient. We should get together and work together, and once build a system, then we can work. We compete. The initial stage we can work. We should work together.
So more collaboration.
Yes. And generally, I watched TV news today, and the temperature in October, the mid-October, increased to the 27 degrees. It's incredible. It's almost summer, right? Yeah. We feel the climate change, right? Yeah. And also the fruit is too much ample and rotten, and cannot eat. It's, for example, the apple and the orange we cannot eat. So it's big influence on the people who are living in Japan, even Japan. So we feel that, we acknowledge that, we should change personally. So we should go forward and promote to change.
Just have to mention, I'm on the opposite bench. I think I don't want to have more collaboration. I want to have more competition.
More competition.
But with a level playing field.
Yeah. Competition creates the best result.
Yeah. And Andrew, I'll give you the last word.
It's a good reminder actually why we're doing this. It is because of the climate and rising sea levels. I think what I'd really like to see, apart from a really, really high carbon tax, would be that there is a longer term pricing network for the purchase of fuels. Shipping is always purchasing spot. If something is cheaper, you'll move to the other fuel and so forth. For us to develop our projects, our peers develop these projects, we do need that longer term pricing security in order to develop these projects. So I think a very, very different way to pricing bunker fueling for shipping, I think, will be a very, very positive advantage to the market.
Lovely. Gentlemen, many thanks for your insights today. If you'd like to show your appreciation. Thank you very much.
For more on sustainability in shipping, visit tradewindsnews.com/sustainability. And to get the Green Seas newsletter in your inbox, visit tinyurl.com/greenseas. Music for this episode is by Alex Grohl from Pixabay.